Well, at the time, I was the organizing director for One DC, Organizing Neighborhood Equity DC, and there was a big commotion in Ward 5 about the idea of creating a worker center for a lot of immigrant workers in the vicinity around a Home Depot, and the backlash was astounding and horrifying, and it was very clear that some of our elected officials, as well as other unsavory folks, were very much trying to pit communities against each other, to try to pit sort of longer established African American communities who had been in the ward against sort of the new immigrant population, and it was working. And DC Jobs for Justice said, like, look, this is not sustainable, and brought together, created a Black and Brown coalition with the Fair Budget Coalition. And really started bringing folks together in community to start having these conversations, and to having this sort of this biracial or multiracial space to talk about sort of shared experiences and to build community that way. It felt really attentive, and it felt like people were really committed to being together. So the fact that there wasn't sort of pushback about language access, interpretation and translation, folks were patient with each other. Folks were just really willing to share and to be in space with each other. It was always a very warm and welcoming space, and you'd leave, no matter if the meeting's at the end of the day, you've had a long day or a long week, you leave reinvigorated because people were really sort of sharing and bonding and connecting in a way, over food, but also just realizing that we are in fact on the same side. We have that the shared enemy is the enemy of sort of oppression, of injustice, of sort of pitting workers against each other, and it was beautiful to have that come together. And I believe that Trabajadores Unidos, which is now an independent organization, sort of was being developed around that time. It might have already existed, but I remember that it sort of blooming during that soon thereafter, which was just a beautiful thing to see. And now they're independent, and you're like, wow, this is like, look at the birth of this how this project has ended up supporting an amazing self-sustaining organization now. Well, I think that DC Jobs with Justice exemplifies what coalition means, right? So like pulling in sort of labor and community and faith and student populations together to really sort of collaborate with shared interests. And I think the other coalition spaces might have a single shared interest, but the sort of I'll be there for you for all of your fights, for all of your issues, that we are all that it's all of us really means all of us, and something that felt, if not unique to DC Jobs for Justice, it's certainly that they led with it in a way that I didn't see many other organizations doing. So if my memory serves correctly, they were the grounding force for this Black and Brown coalition, and I believe that all the meetings I remember going to either being in the DC Jobs for Justice spaces or hosted by them in some way. Yep, that was it. I was done. No. Much work continued, and I think it was a few years later that I started to become more involved again. And at this point, I think we transitioned from Mackenzie Barris as a director to Nikki Lewis, and I think at this point we moved to Elizabeth Falcon as the director. And I want to say it's probably the Paid Family Leave campaign. At this point, I was the director of DC Fair Budget Coalition. And again, DC Jobs with Justice is just critical in bringing together these not disparate actors, but these union, faith, labor, union, community, faith, and students together on sort of on an equal footing, which is another thing that I think is uncommon in a lot of the coalition spaces I see, where especially where you have labor and community, that there's not the one vote, one organization dynamic, because some labor unions are much larger and have a lot more capacity and might donate more, so that still can create an imbalance, and so I've always respected DC Jobs with Justice having this sort of we're all at the table equally here, no matter your size, your budget, your dues. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly to the present day, DC Jobs with Justice's role in fighting and rent striking has been critical. But in the interim, there's also for the public housing repairs for DC residents who have been living in just abominable conditions that are frankly sort of illegal and certainly unethical and unjust. And DC Jobs with Justice was a key player too in sort of pushing for this work. And when I was at DC Fair Budget Coalition, there was never a point where there was a question of whether or not DC Jobs with Justice would be sort of with us, right? So DC Jobs with Justice was always on the side of right, or always on the side of justice in my mind. And so I think the number of fights are Yeah, I mean, they're innumerable. So there's, I'm trying to think. So there's paid family leave, fair housing, the rent control, Walmart, of course, like organizing the workers at Walmart during those fights. So just every time that there's a fight, the workers are involved. I can't think of an occasion when DC Jobs for Justice wasn't there. Well, the DC Jobs for Justice is critical because of its ability to to bring folks together across different dimensions into true partnership and true coalition building. I mean, so like this DC Jobs for Justice does not have campaigns where there's a victory for one sector or one campaign member and then everybody else disbands, right? Everybody's in the fight for the long haul, and there just aren't enough spaces where that's the case, and I think that DC Jobs for Justice is also growing and expanding, and its breadth and expansion, across DC, and it's constantly increasing the awareness of the organization, means that there are more ways for more people to plug in, more ways for more people to be involved, but also the DC Jobs for Justice, I think, has been a leader, is looked to as a leader of moving all things related to workers' rights and beyond, and beyond. And I think that having an entity that has its fingers in, or strong connections to these disparate, again, not disparate, but these not necessarily always connected entities is critical. It's the homecoming space, right? It's a space where no matter what you be working on student labor practices, your university, or creating a workers' rights center in your community. And DC Jobs for Justice is a place to look at those individual fights and to have a broader analysis and look at, so what does this mean for the district writ large? What does it mean when we fought for the tip minimum wage, which was a frustrating campaign because voters had already passed it. I think DC Jobs for Justice was very good at at bringing together again its constituency to support this effort, and again and to win, and at the ballot box, although certainly not ultimately because of bad actors on the city council or the district council, which also goes to show the need for DC Jobs for Justice to continue having this advocacy role and pushing for broad-based policy change throughout the district. So I think having DC Jobs for Justice with labor, community, faith, and students having and strong commitment to each, and each of them being committed to each other's fights is critical in moving forward, because we need the massive workers, but also as DC is being rapidly gentrified, we also need a massive allies, because at some point there's not going to be DC will not be the same the district that it is now. So DC Jobs for Justice has the capacity to help folks with local site-specific or local campaigns, and still look above that at the broader political analysis and figure out how to engage with DC Council and other in agencies that can help implement and push for the change that we're fighting for. That role is just becoming increasingly important, especially as people are being more and more people being pushed out of the district, and I think DC Jobs for Justice can play a critical role in helping fight the forces of gentrification, so that DC doesn't become what some other localities have had to have lost, so all the folks who are working all the working families, all the folks who are poor and not able to work. Leaving the tip minimum wage campaign, saying no, this strategy that one entity wanted to push didn't make sense, and so DC Jobs for Justice said once the council got rid of invalidated the will of the people and with the tip minimum wage and did not allow that to pass, there was a big conversation about what do we do next. And DC Jobs for Justice is one of the organizations that I respected, because we're like, okay, it was a loss, and you can lose well, and I think we can build with the loss. But DC Jobs for Justice was also clear about the strategy being proposed then was to do a recall election for candidates, and they were among there are few partners, but they're among the partners who made the right assessment and analysis, I think, is that we need to build more power to make that happen, that we didn't have the organizational capacity among the coalition or broader to run an effective recall election, and the money and time that it would take would actually cost us on some of the issues, and that instead of doing a recall, that would make sense to actually get rid of these, just to go through the traditional electoral process and get rid of candidates. And lo and behold, one of the worst candidates we had at the time were one of the worst council members in terms of like being opposed to workers' rights. Jack Evans was ultimately replaced, and another horrible council member again from Ward 4, Brendan Todd, was replaced with a great progressive Janice Lewis. Janice Lewis. George, yes, she's married many over a year ago. But Janice Lewis George, who is a phenomenal speaker. So I think that strategy was the right one, because I don't think we would have won, and I think we would have lost a lot of time and energy. So DC Jobs with Justice being willing to say like, look, the tip minimum wage is on the side of justice, is the right thing to do, but also you have to be realistic about what your capacity is. And I really respected DC Jobs with Justice being among the groups that was able to say, look, that this is the better approach is the approach that we as a community took, which was to sort of primary folks, which is really, primarying and electing in DC are essentially the same thing, but to get rid of bad council members and to spend our energy sort of still building for the campaigns that were important.